20,000 feet above occupied Europe, the sky is dying. A B-17 Flying Fortress, once the pride of American engineering, is now little more than a screaming coffin of torn aluminum and shattered glass. The No. 3 engine is gone, blown apart by an 88mm flak shell that ripped through the nacelle like a fist through paper. Black smoke streams from the wing, a funeral shroud trailing behind the crippled bomber as it lurches through the frozen air. Inside, the world is chaos. The fuselage is split open, a jagged wound that howls with the voice of a hurricane. Wind tears through the cabin at 200 miles per hour, so cold it burns exposed skin like acid. The smell is overwhelming. Cordite from spent shell casings, hydraulic fluid leaking in crimson streams, and something else. Something metallic and warm. Blood. The waist gunner is slumped against the bulkhead, his oxygen mask dangling uselessly. The ball turret gunner is screaming into the intercom, but his words are lost in the roar. Shrapnel has turned the instrument panel into a constellation of shattered glass and sparking wires. The altimeter is spinning backward. The artificial horizon is a lie. By every measure, by every protocol drilled into them during training at Randolph Field and Dyersburg, this crew should be bailing out. The bailout bell should be ringing. Parachutes should be blossoming against the grey European sky like dandelions in a graveyard. But the pilot's hands remain locked on the yoke. His knuckles are white. His jaw is set. Through the cracked windscreen, smeared with oil and something darker, he stares ahead with the intensity of a man who has glimpsed something beyond the veil of rational thought. His co-pilot is shouting at him, words that might be pleas or curses, but the pilot doesn't respond. He has made a decision that will transform this dying aircraft into something the enemy has never encountered, a decision that will earn him a reputation whispered in ready rooms and debated in after-action reports for decades. A decision that will make them call him mad. To understand what comes next, you must first understand the machine. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was conceived in 1934 as a defensive weapon, a long-range bomber capable of intercepting enemy fleets before they reached American shores. By 1943, it had evolved into something far more lethal, a 4-engine strategic bomber designed to carry the war into the heart of Nazi Germany. 10 50-caliber machine guns bristled from every angle, nose, tail, waist, ball turret, dorsal and ventral positions. It could carry 4,800 pounds of bombs to Berlin and back. Its maximum speed was 287 miles per hour. Its service ceiling, 35,000 feet. The Army Air Forces called it a fortress because it was supposed to defend itself. The men who flew them called it a coffin because it rarely did. The statistics were grim. In 1943, the average operational life of a B-17 over Europe was 11 missions. Crews were required to complete 25 before rotating home, a mathematical impossibility that everyone understood, but no one spoke about. The 8th Air Force lost 350 bombers in October 1943 alone. That's 3,500 men, dead, missing or captured, in 31 days. The flak was merciless. German 88mm anti-aircraft batteries could fill entire cubic miles of sky with superheated shrapnel, timed to explode at bomber altitude. Pilots described flying through flak fields as swimming through molasses made of razor blades. A single fragment the size of a thumb could sever a hydraulic line, puncture a fuel tank, or kill a man instantly. And then there were the fighters. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf FW-190s. Sleek, fast, and piloted by veterans of the Eastern Front who had learned their trade against Soviet bombers. They attacked from 12 o'clock high, diving out of the sun with 20mm cannons blazing. They targeted engines first, then cockpits. A bomber without engines was a glider. A bomber without pilots was a tomb. Into this meat grinder walked First Lieutenant Jay Zeamer Jr. Born in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 1918, Zeamer was a study in contradictions. At MIT, he'd excelled in civil engineering, but barely scraped through flight training. Too reckless, his instructors said. Too willing to bend rules. When he arrived in the Pacific Theater in 1942, he was assigned as a backup pilot, flying only when someone else was sick or dead. He hated it. So Zeamer did something extraordinary. He assembled his own crew from the misfits, the rejects, the men nobody else wanted. He scrounged a war-weary B-17E that had been written off as unsalvageable and rebuilt it with spare parts and obsessive perfectionism. His crew called him eager. His commanding officers called him a loose cannon. History would call him something else entirely. June 16, 1943, Port Moresby, New Guinea. The briefing room smells like sweat, cigarette smoke and mildew, the permanent perfume of the South Pacific. Maps cover the walls, held in place with rusty thumbtacks. The largest map shows the Solomon Islands, a scattered archipelago of green ink against blue, stretching northeast toward the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. An intelligence officer, too young for the circles under his eyes, taps a spot on the map with a wooden pointer. Buka Island, he says. Reconnaissance run. We need photographs of Japanese airfield installations, harbour activity, shipping movements. High-altitude pass, in and out before they know you're there. Someone in the back laughs, a bitter sound without humour. Buka is 600 miles from Port Moresby. 600 miles over enemy-controlled ocean, then a photographic run over one of the most heavily defended islands in the Solomon chain. Zeros, Mitsubishi A6M fighters, are based there by the dozens. Anti-aircraft batteries ring the airfields like thorns around a rose. The intelligence officer doesn't meet anyone's eyes when he says, "Fighter escort is unavailable." That's when the room goes quiet. No fighter escort means the bomber will be alone. Alone over enemy territory, flying slow and level, while the camera operator snaps photographs through the open bomb bay. Alone when the Zeros scramble. Alone when the flak batteries open fire. Zeamer raises his hand. "We'll take it." His crew doesn't flinch. They'd known this was coming. Zeamer only volunteered for missions that other crews refused. The long reconnaissance flights, the photo mapping runs, the sorties that offered little glory and high casualty rates. His bombardier, Joseph Sarnowski, lights a cigarette and nods. The navigator, Ruby Johnston, is already plotting fuel consumption on a notepad. The briefing officer looks relieved. "Wheels up. At 0400. Weather's clear. Expect company over the target." Outside, the night is hot and loud with insects. Zeamer walks to the flight line alone, hands in his pockets, whistling something that might be Glenn Miller. His B-17, tail number 41-26666, nicknamed Old 666 by the crew, sits beneath a camouflage net, exhaust stains streaking her flanks like war paint. He stops at the nose and runs his hand along the cold aluminum. Tomorrow, this aircraft will fly into the heart of Japanese-controlled airspace. Tomorrow it will face odds that would make seasoned veterans request sick leave. Tomorrow it will become a legend. The first hour is peaceful, almost beautiful. Old 666 climbs into the dawn, her 4 Wright Cyclone engines thrumming in harmony. Below, the coral sea spreads out like hammered pewter, endless and indifferent. The sun rises behind them, painting the clouds in shades of copper and gold. For a moment, just a moment, it's possible to forget there's a war on. Then the intercom crackles. "Navigator to pilot, 20 minutes to Buka." Zeamer's voice is calm. "Copy. Waist gunners, stay sharp." The tension ratchets up immediately. Men check their guns, cycle the charging handles, peer through plexiglass blisters at the empty sky. The camera operator, Staff Sergeant William Kendrick, prepares his equipment in the open bomb bay, where the wind roars and the altitude cold bites through layers of fleece and leather. Buka appears on the horizon like a dark smudge. Then suddenly it's beneath them. an island of green jungle and red earth, scarred by runways and revetments. Kendrick's camera begins its mechanical chatter, capturing frame after frame. The run is supposed to take 4 minutes, 4 minutes of level flight at 25,000 feet, while the Japanese decide whether to kill them. That's when the first Zero appears. It comes from above, screaming down through a gap in the clouds, its engine howling like a banshee. Tracer rounds, glowing green fingers, reach out and claw at old 666's fuselage. The dorsal gunner, Sergeant Forrest Dillman, swings his twin 50 caliber mount and returns fire, the guns shaking the entire airframe with their thunder. Then there are more. 5, 10, 20 Zeros, rising from Buka like hornets from a kicked nest. They attack in pairs, one high and one low, slashing through the bomber's defensive arcs with the precision of killers who have done this 100 times before. The sky becomes a web of tracer fire, green and red lines crisscrossing in geometry, like patterns of death. Old 66666 shudders. A 20mm cannon shell punches through the nose, detonates inside the bombardier's compartment. Sarnowski is thrown backward, his flight suit shredded, blood spraying across the Norden bomb site. The navigator, Johnston, is hit in the legs. The tail gunner, Sergeant Jay Britton, reports his position is shot to pieces. Another Zero attacks from 12 o'clock level. Its guns flash. The co-pilot, Lieutenant John Britton, slumps forward, his controls going slack. A shell fragment has torn through his wrist, severing tendons. Zeamer is alone in the cockpit now, flying with one hand while the other paws at the blood-slick throttle quadrant. The number 4 engine is streaming oil. The hydraulics are failing. The oxygen system has been compromised. Every regulation, every training manual, every voice of reason screams the same command: abandon aircraft. But Zeamer sees something else. He sees the Zeros clustering for another attack run. He sees their patterns, their rhythms, their vulnerabilities. And in the chaos of his dying bomber, in the screaming wind and the smell of blood and burning oil, he makes a calculation. He can still fight. This is the moment that defies understanding. By all logic, old 6666 should be going down. 2 engines are damaged, the hydraulics are failing, and half the crew is wounded or dying. The co-pilot is incapacitated. The bombardier, Sarnowski, has been hit so badly that bone is visible through the torn fabric of his flight suit. Yet he crawls back to his gun, dragging himself across a floor slick with his own blood, and resumes firing. Zeamer keys the intercom. His voice is steady, almost conversational. All positions, weapons free. We're not running. There's a pause. Then, from the tail, "You're out of your goddamn mind, Lieutenant." Maybe he is. But madness and genius often wear the same face. Instead of diving for the clouds, standard evasion protocol, Zeamer does the unthinkable. He levels out. He steadies the aircraft. He transforms old 666 from a fleeing target into a stationary gun platform, and he dares the Zeros to come closer. And they do. The first Zero commits to a head-on attack, closing at a combined speed of over 500 miles per hour. Most pilots would flinch. Most pilots would brake left or right, disrupt their gunner's aim, prioritize evasion over offense. Zeamer doesn't move. He holds the bomber steady as a surgeon's hand, giving his nose gunner, Sergeant Herbert Pugh, who has taken over from the wounded Sarnowski, a perfect firing solution. Pugh's twin 50 calibers roar. Tracers reach out and touch the Zero's engine cowling. The Japanese fighter disintegrates in a spray of aluminum and flame, tumbling past old 666's wing so close that the crew feels the heat. 1 down. But there are still 19. Zeamer's strategy is suicidal, and he knows it. By refusing to evade, he's making his bomber an easier target. But he's also doing something the Japanese pilots don't expect. He's turning the engagement into a gunfight instead of a hunt. And old 666, for all her wounds, is still a fortress. The waist gunners, Sergeants George Kendrick and Bud Thews, pour fire into a Zero attempting a beam attack. It peels away, trailing smoke. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant Johnny Abel, locked in his tiny sphere beneath the fuselage, tracks a fighter attempting to attack from below and stitches it with 50 caliber rounds. It spirals into the sea. Sarnowski, despite his catastrophic injuries, continues firing from the nose. When another Zero lines up for a frontal assault, he doesn't miss. The enemy aircraft explodes in mid-air, so close that fragments pepper old 666's windscreen. Then Sarnowski collapses. This time he doesn't get up. But the message has been sent. Old 666 is no longer prey. She's a wounded predator, and she's taking her attackers with her. The Zeros, accustomed to bombers that fled or fell, are suddenly uncertain. Their formations loosen. Their attacks become hesitant. Zeamer seizes the moment. He banks hard left, an impossible maneuver for an aircraft in this condition, and brings his dorsal guns to bear on a Zero, overshooting its attack run. Dillman doesn't waste the opportunity. The Zero tumbles from the sky, its pilot dead in the cockpit. 3 down, maybe 4. The engagement has lasted only 8 minutes, but it feels like hours, and it's not over. The Zeros are regrouping for a final coordinated assault. Zeamer watches them form up, high and to the right, preparing for a diving attack that will overwhelm his remaining defenses. He adjusts his grip on the yoke, and he smiles. What happens next will be argued about in squadron ready rooms for decades. Some will say it was training, others will call it instinct. A few will whisper that Zeamer had simply crossed a threshold where survival instinct and combat fury merge into something beyond rational thought. The Zeros dive. They come in a coordinated wave, 6 aircraft staggered in altitude, attacking from multiple vectors simultaneously. It's a textbook maneuver designed to overwhelm a bomber's defensive fire. One gunner can't track 6 targets. Something will get through. But Zeamer isn't thinking about defense anymore. He's thinking about offense. He slams the throttles forward, despite the damaged engines, despite the screaming metal fatigue, despite every warning light on the panel blazing red. Old 666 surges forward, accelerating into the attack instead of away from it. The closure rate becomes so fast that the Zero pilots have less than a second to adjust their aim. It's not enough. The first Zero overshoots, its cannon shells tearing through empty air where old 666 should have been. The dorsal gunner catches it in the dive, raking its fuselage from engine to tail. It doesn't pull out. It simply keeps diving until it hits the ocean. The second Zero adjusts, banking hard right to match old 666's sudden acceleration. But the bank exposes its underside, soft belly, no armor. The ball turret gunner Abel is waiting. His guns flash. The Zero sheds parts like a bird molting feathers, then disintegrates entirely. 5 down. The remaining 4 break off their attack run, climbing back to altitude. They've never encountered a bomber that fights like this. Doctrine says heavy bombers are defensive platforms, relying on formation, mutual support, and evasive maneuvers. Old 666 has no formation. She has no support, and she's not evading. She's hunting. Zeamer's voice cuts through the inter. ERCOM, hoarse but steady. Waist gunners, target right side high. Ball turret, watch R6. Nose gun. He stops. Sarnowski is dead. The realization hits him like a physical blow, but there's no time to process it. The Zeros are lining up for another pass. This time they're more cautious. They maintain distance, probing old 666's defenses with short bursts, looking for a weak point. They find one, the tailgun position, half destroyed from earlier attacks. Britain is still there, still firing, but his guns are jammed and his position is shredded. A Zero commits, diving on the tail from 7 o'clock high. Zeamer sees it reflected in the oil-smeared windscreen. He can't save the tail gunner. The angles are impossible, but he can make the Zero pay. He kicks the rudder hard, skidding the entire bomber sideways in a maneuver that should rip the wings off. The waist guns come to bear. The Zero, committed to its attack run, flies directly into the stream of fire. 6 down. But the victory is costly. The maneuver has overstressed the airframe. Rivets are popping. The No. 3 engine, already damaged, seizes entirely and bursts into flame. The fire suppression system is offline. The engine burns, black smoke pouring from the cowling. Zeamer feathers the propeller, cutting fuel to the engine. The fire dies slowly, reluctantly. Old 666 is now flying on 2 engines, maybe 1.5. Her airspeed is bleeding away. Her altitude is dropping. The remaining Zeros sense it. They circle like sharks around a wounded whale, preparing for the kill. But they've made a mistake. They've gotten too close. And old 6666 still has teeth. The final engagement lasts 90 seconds. It's not a dogfight. Bombers can't dogfight. It's a brawl, brutal and close range, a mutual exchange of fire that would make a gunslinger flinch. Tracers cross in the air like laser beams. Shell casings rain from old 6666's open waist positions, glittering brass falling toward the sea. When it ends, 2 more Zeros are falling. The rest break off. They don't flee. Japanese naval aviators don't flee, but they disengage, climbing back toward Buka with damaged aircraft and depleted ammunition. 8 Zeros confirmed destroyed, perhaps more. The exact count will never be known. What is known is this. Old 666 is still flying. Barely, impossibly. But flying, silence. After the thunder of 50-caliber machine guns and roaring engines, the silence is almost painful. The intercom crackles with static. Someone is crying, short, hitching sobs that sound like they're coming from very far away. Zeamer's voice cuts through. Damage report. The responses come slowly, each one worse than the last. Tail gunner here. Positions destroyed, but I'm okay. Ball turret. I'm hit, but I can move. Waist gun port. Kendrick's bad. Real bad. Navigator. Johnston. I can't feel my legs. Sarnowski doesn't respond. He's slumped in the nose, his blood soaking into the maps and charts scattered across the deck. He died manning his gun, firing until his body simply gave out. Later, he will be awarded the Medal of Honor. Later, his family will receive a folded flag and a letter that begins, "The President of the United States takes pride in presenting." But that's later. Right now, Zeamer has a different problem. Getting home. Old 666 is dying. The No. 3 engine is gone, charred and silent. The No. 4 is running rough, coughing black smoke. That leaves 2 engines, 1 and 2, and they're being asked to carry a fully loaded bomber across 600 miles of open ocean. The math doesn't work. Zeamer does it anyway. He descends, trading altitude for airspeed, pushing the surviving engines to the edge of their tolerances. The airframe groans. The hydraulics are almost completely gone, which means the control surfaces respond like they're moving through molasses. Every adjustment requires both hands on the yoke and all his strength. His co-pilot, Britain, has regained consciousness. His wrist is crudely bandaged, but he can't grip the controls. He sits there, watching Zeamer fly with a mixture of awe and horror. "We're not going to make it," Britain says quietly. Zeamer doesn't answer. The hours crawl by. The sun climbs high. The coral sea below is beautiful and indifferent. Sharks circle in the water, drawn by the oil slick trailing from old 666. Once a whale surfaces and exhales, its spout catching the light. Port Moresby appears on the horizon like a mirage. The airfield tower spots them first. A B-17 limping in from the north, trailing smoke, flying too low and too slow. Ground crews stop what they're doing and stare. Someone counts the holes later. over 180 separate flak and bullet impacts. The tail section is so damaged that it's a miracle it's still attached. The nose is shredded. Zeamer lines up for final approach with no hydraulics, no flaps, and no margin for error. The landing gear drops manually. The crew cranks it down by hand. The wheels lock. Old 666 descends, her engines screaming, her airframe shaking, held together by rivets and willpower. She touches down hard, bounces once, then settles. Zeamer stands on the brakes. They barely work. The bomber rolls to the end of the runway, finally stopping just short of the gravel overrun. When the engines shut down, the silence returns. Ground crews approach cautiously, as if afraid the aircraft might collapse. When they open the waste hatch, blood pours out, liters of it, pooling on the tarmac. Someone whispers, "Jesus Christ." Zeamer climbs out last. His flight suit is soaked with blood, some his, most belonging to others. He stands on the wing for a moment, looking back at old 666, his hand resting on her scarred aluminum skin. Then his knees buckle and he collapses. Jay Zeamer Jr. woke up in a field hospital 3 days later. His first question was about his crew. 7 of the 9 men aboard old 666 had been wounded. Sarnosky was dead. The navigator, Johnston, would spend months in recovery. But they were alive. Against impossible odds, against every statistical probability, they had survived. Zeamer's second question was about his aircraft. Old 666 never flew again. The damage was too extensive, the airframe too fatigued. She was stripped for parts and left to rust at the edge of the Port Moresby airfield, a hulking memorial to a mission that should have ended in disaster. The Army Air Forces moved quickly to classify the mission. Too many questions, too many inconsistencies. How had a single B-17, with no fighter escort, survived an extended engagement with 20 Zeros? How had that same aircraft, crippled and bleeding, flown 600 miles back to base? The official after-action report is dry, clinical. Pilot demonstrated exceptional airmanship under combat conditions. But the unofficial reports, the ones whispered in ready rooms, shared over warm beer in Quonset huts, told a different story. They spoke of a pilot who had gone mad with fury, who had turned his bomber into a weapon of vengeance, who had fought the Zeros not as a soldier following doctrine, but as something primal and relentless. They called him mad, but they also called him a hero. On January 4, 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed 2 citations. One awarded the Medal of Honor to Captain Jay Zeamer Jr. for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. The other awarded the same medal posthumously to Captain Joseph Sarnosky. It was the only time in World War II that an entire bomber crew, pilot and bombardier, received the Medal of Honor for the same action. Zeamer returned to the United States in early 1944. He was assigned to training duties, teaching new pilots the mechanics of survival. But those who knew him said the war had hollowed him out. He spoke little about Buka. He never flew combat again. After the war, he disappeared into civilian life. He worked as an engineer, married, raised children. He attended a few reunions, posed for a few photographs, but mostly he stayed quiet. When reporters asked about the mission, he deflected. "I just did my job," he'd say. But his crew remembered differently. Britton, the wounded co-pilot, said, "He saved our lives, not by running, but by fighting. He turned that plane into something it was never designed to be." Abel, the ball turret gunner, said, "I thought he'd lost his mind. Then I realized he hadn't lost it. He'd weaponized it." Dillman, the dorsal gunner, perhaps said it best. "We were dead men. He refused to accept it. And somehow that was enough." Zeamer died in 2007 at the age of 88 in a quiet nursing home in New England. His obituary mentioned the Medal of Honor, the mission over Buka, the impossible odds. It did not mention the nightmares. It did not mention the weight of carrying 8 men home on sheer will. Today, old 666 exists only in photographs and memory. Her hulk was scrapped decades ago, melted down and reformed into washing machines or car fenders or children's bicycles. But the story endures. Because it asks a question that we still can't answer. Was Jay Zeamer mad? Or was he simply the only sane man in an insane war? Did he break the rules, or did he reveal that the rules were always meant to be broken when survival demanded it? Perhaps madness and heroism are not opposites. Perhaps they're the same impulse, viewed from different angles. Perhaps, at 20,000 feet over Buka Island, with his crew dying and his aircraft disintegrating, Zeamer glimpsed a truth that the rest of us spend our lives avoided. That sometimes the only rational response to an irrational world is to become irrational yourself. And in doing so, to survive.